We on Five Sports Podcast, the spot, season number 5, episode number 12. And woo, boy, I hope you guys have had a great week so far. Also, too, man, I hope you guys had a great weekend on the back end of the weekend, man. First and foremost, we on Five Sports Podcast, the spot. We provide high five takes and analysis across the sporting landscape. And if you're an OG of the show, man, I appreciate the check-in once again, as we always do. And, man, it's been a lot going on, man, across the sporting landscape since the last time I checked in with y'all, man. It's a whole lot going on, what they say, a whole lot. First and foremost, man, I'm going to start off, man, congratulating the Las Vegas Aces, man, winning the WNBA championship. You know, Aja Wilson, MVP, man, just an outstanding season for the Aces. They started off slow during the WNBA season. Then they got hotter than a firecracker, winning 14, 15 in a row. You know, I knew coming into the WNBA playoffs, man, that they were the team to beat, that they were going to win the WNBA championship. Congratulations, too, to the Phoenix Mercury, man. They had an outstanding season as well, but to the victor goes the spoils. Just a triumphant win for them, and I just love just the talent that they got in Las Vegas. I think they're the most talented team, you know, in the whole WNBA, with, you know, Wilson being, just a front runner, just of all of that. So now, congratulations once again to the ladies, you know, WNBA champion Las Vegas Aces. Also on the flip side, man, you know, we got a couple coaches that kind of took the guillotine this week. First coach that took the guillotine, man, is a lot of people, and I knew that seat was getting hot up in Happy Valley, man. We had James Franklin fired from the Penn State Nittany Lions. You know, just a team that, you know, he's been there for 12 years. And it's just a situation where this team could never win the real big games. They came into this season, preseason number 2. You know, it got, you know, talent. I think they probably have the best backfield in the whole college football, man. So this is a team that, for me, is just very, very talented. And Franklin, it just seemed like he just didn't have the gumption of just to win those big games. And at the end of the day, you know, Penn State is, you know, a happy university, you know, meaning no pun intended, you know, but just a university that, you know, they're trying to compete for a national championship. And I just think that, one, just the recruiting and, you know, just what they doing up there, they just want to have a general in place to where, hey, man, these big games, we able to win these games and, you know, move ourselves forward, man. So Franklin took the guillotine. Also, another coach that took the guillotine, man, Callahan up in Tennessee. Boy, it's been crazy. The Tennessee Titans, man, this is a team that, you know, they was able to get themselves, you know, a victory, you know, week before last. But, you know, I seen the tea leaves, man. It wasn't no secret that, you know, Callahan was on the hot seat. And it's just funny because just to see what this organization has been through over the last 2 years, you know, firing Van Carteren, you know, the general manager of the Tennessee Titans, and then rolling into Callahan, which we all knew that, hey, it's a new, you know, front office up in the play. You're not going to be there long, fam, especially if y'all not winning football games. You know, this is an organization that, you know, drafted Cam Ward with the number 1 pick in the draft, and Cam has been struggling a little bit. But, you know, I'm not one to just say, hey, you know, it's a bust, it's a mistake. I mean, I've seen some great NFL quarterbacks, you know, first season on a team that really wasn't talented, you know, crash and burn. Peyton Manning being one of them. You know, Troy Aikman being another one of them. You know, so I've seen Hall of Fame guys not come out of the box just right away, and it simply just boils down to, hey, the talent around you. But, you know, well, like I said, one surprise too much that Callahan got fired. So we'll see what, you know, the Titans do moving forward. You know, it's just in their next, you know, head coaching search. Also, MLB, man, boy, still kind of salty about my Cubs, man. Just can't believe just what happened. You know, taking that L to the Milwaukee Brewers in the divisional series. And now we got the NLCS that then jumped off. And speaking of, you know, 2-0 on the other side of the NLCS with the Dodgers with a 2-game lead over the Brewers. You know, it's funny, too, because I was having an off-record conversation, man, with my man Isalim, Mr. Tater Street from the Weekly Dog Sports Betting Podcast. He definitely going to be swinging through this board coming up on some future episodes, man. But me and him had a conversation just about the Dodgers in itself. You know, this is a team and an organization that, you know, what they say, money can't buy me love, but they can show buy some great players. And the Dodgers have great players. Now, to me, they kind of, I wouldn't say melded in during the regular season, but this is a team that a lot of people expected to win 100-plus ball games. And to see this team, you know, end up, about 92, 93 games, you know, on the season, A lot of people said, hey, I don't know about the Dodgers. I already knew what time it was. This team was gearing up for a playoff run, just the pitching. I just think that the Brewers, and no shade on them, obviously, because they beat my Cubs. I just think that the Dodgers are in kind of a different class. Now, the Brewers, they can, pick up the pieces on it. It's a best of 7. So I'm not saying this thing is over at 2 games to none, but, it's a situation of where, the Dodgers look like they got full momentum. So we'll definitely see what that do, moving forward in that series. On the other side of the series as well, we got the Seattle Mariners, man, up 2 games to none. As this game, ALCS against the Blue Jays. Blue Jays was a team that was hot. They got rid of the New York Yankees in the divisional round. But the Mariners, man, just looking real good. I do think that Kyle Rowley, the catcher of the Seattle Mariners, he should be the MVP, man. You got a catch out here hitting 60 dingers during the regular season. Go ahead and get that man the AL MVP award. But the Mariners, man, they looking real good as we pressing this thing up. They playing right now against the Toronto Blue Jays, looking to go up 3 games to none in that series, man. So this World Series might be a little bit more closer than a lot of people anticipate. So, man, it's just an exciting episode, man, across the board. We're going to get into week number 6 in the National Football League. Take that tour of duty of what all cracked off in week number 6. So, man, I appreciate you guys checking in with your boy. And don't forget, man, to check me out on Facebook. We on Fire Sports Podcast. Also, too, on YouTube. We on Fire Sports Podcast. On Twitter and X at We on Fire Sports. Also on Podbean, where all podcasts can be listened to. But, man, we're going to get right into this thing, man. We on Fire Sports Podcast. The spot. All right, as promised, man, we going to take a little dip into week number 6. What happened across the National Football League is now, man, we midweek, and there's a lot of things that was telling in week number 6 across the National Football League. To me, man, once you get a month and a half into the NFL season, things get a little tricky because you still have some teams that hovering about 500 or so that's we kind of consider somewhat contenders. We got some teams that riding a little high, but it may be fool's gold. Then you got some teams that winless on the season, or 1-5, and just look like it's been one, look like it's a wrap for the season. But I thought this was an interesting week. Basically, things jumped off on Thursday. Thursday should have been what I consider, last Thursday, obviously the litmus test of what week number 6 was going to be, because them New York Football Giants, man, showed out, man. At the Meadowlands, just the job that they was able to do to knock off the Philadelphia Eagles and win that game 34-17. Man, Jackson Dart and Scatterboo. These guys were brought some fresh air to the New York Football Giants. It was a team that we all knew going into this season that, some heads on the chopping block. You got Brian Dable, who headed on the chopping block. You got Joe Shane, general manager of the Giants, who headed on the chopping block. So, we kind of knew going into this year, it's just like, okay, we got Russ the starter. You bring in Jameis Winston, over to the New York Football Giants. You draft Jackson Dart. And so, no pun intended, the New York Giants, they threw a lot of darts at the dartboard, just to try to kind of figure out their quarterback situation. And we saw, which was kind of funny during the game, it was just kind of telling just to see Jackson Dart, get the injury, get cracked. It was a big-time hit, go into the blue tent. And it seemed like not only was it Brian Dable, but it was everybody and their mama back there. The governor of New York. You got the mayor of New York City back there in the blue tent. You got his mama back there in the blue tent. Just everybody back there in the blue tent. Just to kind of check on his livelihood. But, he's able to come back into the game, obviously. And you can tell that the team is rallied around them. And it's funny because Russell Wilson came in for a play, and boy, did he get booed unmercifully. It just was a crazy situation. So, man, shout out to New York just in that victory. Still breathing a little life up in New York City, man. We'll see what they do. Obviously, it was a little damper, with Malik Neighbors, a couple weeks ago getting that ACL injury, man. But it looks like the Giants, they got hope in New York. Not for them Philadelphia Eagles. And the Eagles, to me, 2 in a row now for them, 2 losses in a row. They're a team and an organization that, a lot of people knew, hey, look, this offense is not kicking on all cylinders. This is a football club that, I've watched them play every single week this year, I've been kind of locked in, seeing what the Eagles are going to do, as far as, being able to defend their Super Bowl crown. And, it all points back, to a myriad of things. One, it kind of starts with me with the offensive coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles. They changed coordinators, and it just seemed like this offense has no rhythm. They cannot run the football with Saquon Barkley, who arguably could be the best back in the National Football League, fresh off that 2 Gs. If the season would start right now, he's on pace for less than 1,000 yards on the year. And to me, it's interesting because there's no rhythm with the running game. They're not really running, RPOs, or they're not really, it's just kind of like a just clandestine type of offense. You got situation with A.J. Brown, him. And I will say this, Hurts, trying to target him, it just seemed like Hurts is just, his accuracy is just down the tank. Now, one thing about Jalen Hurts, I will say, this guy's a hard worker. He's going to get back into the lab. He's a no-frills type of guy. But, man, this 2 in a row, this defense is not the same defense as we seen last season. I'm not saying Rome is burning for the Philadelphia Eagles, but, they're in a precarious situation. But I think that at the end of the day, it all kind of works itself out for them because they just learned the simple, old school lesson that fat meat, we must think fat meat wasn't greasy, as the old saying would go back in the day, man. Meaning that, everything was sweet. This team was undefeated. They had won 21 out of 22 games dating back to last season. And sometimes, man, you need that little humble pie to kind of shake up the apple cart a little bit. So we'll definitely, see what it do. Another interesting game, man, on Sunday that kind of caught my eye. I'm not saying this from a perspective of the game is exciting and all of that, but the Broncos and the New York Football Jets. Broncos was able to win this game 13-11. For me, you got Justin Fields, finally kind of getting over, just the, whole concussion situation. Him back on the field. There's a lot of people that felt like, hey, the Jets, their offense, might kick into gear a little bit in this game, even though the Broncos got a good young defense. And they just was non-existent. And, for a team, like the Jets and Aaron Glenn to start off 0-6, Aaron Glenn, you can tell, man, he already came with the salt and pepper, up to New York, and it's getting more salty and more pepper because he's just in a situation where you can just kind of tell the frustration. I just think that, for me, it's really not Aaron Glenn. It's just a devoid of talent in New York. And there's no shade on Justin Fields because, I've had the privilege to watch Justin Fields when he was in high school. Representing, down in Kennesaw, Georgia, not too far from where this podcast is being delivered at. So, I've seen him go up to the University of Georgia, leave Georgia, go to Ohio State, do his thing at Ohio State, get drafted by my Chicago Bears. The Bears, moved on, obviously, by, taking Caleb Williams with the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. And, you go to Pittsburgh, and then I see the Jets, and I'm just like, look, man, at the end of the day, Justin Fields is a backup quarterback in the National Football League. And so, for the Jets to think that, hey, this offense is just going to come out on some gangbusters type mode, no, you kind of sold yourself short by bringing in Justin Fields because you have a quarterback that's kind of primarily one-dimensional. He's not a guy that's going to go out there and throw for 450 yards. And so in the AFC and in the National Football League as a whole, if your quarterback's incapable of really throwing up them 300, 350 pieces, on the yardage tip and a couple touchdowns, every week you kind of looking up towards that, then it's a wrap. You're not finna, not only contend, but, it could be a situation where you may have, one of the top 3 picks in the next NFL draft, which it looks like what the New York Football Jets is headed towards. So we'll see what it do, man. But I just think that was very, very interesting. There's been a lot of talking heads out there, man, raining down just on what the Jets, been able to do. But at the end of the day, man, talent wins all. I just think that you can't wave a magic wand just for Aaron Glenn just to be that guy. So we'll definitely see what it do. But moving forward, man, another game to me that was interesting was the Los Angeles Chargers going down to Miami to take on the Miami Dolphins. We all know what type of season the Dolphins have had, with Tyreek Hill being, out for the season with that horrific injury that he had. The Chargers coming into this game, this is a team that had lost, 2 games in a row. I had them in my Big 5 power rankings. I had them all locked and loaded and all of that. And the air got let out the balloon a little bit. But I think that for me, with Jim Harbaugh being the head coach of the Chargers, I think that they were able to go down in Miami, keep their nose to the grindstone and win a close game, even though Miami, put some pressure on them towards the end of this football game, 29-27. Justin Herbert, over 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think that Ladd McConkey actually had a build and a touchdown as well. just the Chargers, they got, some injuries. Mario Hampton, on the IR right now. And so they're trying to figure out their run game. You had Najee Harris, who went out, out for the season, earlier a little bit a couple weeks ago. So this team is trying to figure out, whether or not, what their identity is as far as the run game. But it was a good victory for them. The biggest footnote out of this football game, though, was just, the comments by Tua. Just kind of questioning just the, leadership of his teammates and just a players-only meeting and guys showing up for the meeting and all of that. And, to me, it's just a situation is that Mike McDaniel is a dead man walking. Now, the owner, Stephen Ross, I'm not sure if he's going to make that decision as far as, clipping his wings before the end of the regular season. But unless they come with some miraculous, type of vibe and type of move, man, it's a wrap, for McDaniel down in Miami. This team, they spent some, money on the offensive side and on the defensive side of the football with Chris Greer. I'm not sure if Chris is the first domino to fall in just the lexicon, but I think that at the end of the season, I wouldn't be surprised if both of them up out of there. And to the Chargers, man, they're able to, just kind of, get their wheels back turning because the Kansas City Chiefs is breathing down their neck in that AFC West. So that was another little interesting forte, that I, got an opportunity to take a look at in week number 6. Also, we had the Carolina Panthers, man. The Dallas Cowboys traveled down to lovely Charlotte, and the Panthers was able to knock off the Cowboys 30-27. It was a big time revenge game for Rico Dowdle. Everybody know, man, Rico Dowdle, just formerly playing for the Dallas Cowboys. He was just on one coming into this game, fresh off a 200-yard game. Bounced right back with a $183, catching a receiving touchdown as well in this football game. People who got them on their fantasy team, I know y'all excited right now just to have them. Not sure just on a fantasy tip, what will happen, next week with Chuba Hubbard coming back into the fold. Yours truly have both of them on his fantasy team. So, man, I got some decisions I got to make on my end of the coin. But it was a good win for the Panthers. They 500 now, 3-0 at home, man, up in Charlotte. So, the wheels might be turning, man, for the Panthers. I think that they're gaining confidence game by game. For the Cowboys, man, this defense is hot garbage. I seen some of the comments that Jerry Jones made after the game. Oh, I think we turning the page and all of that, man. Boy, stop. To quote my man Big Boy from Outkast, boy, stop. This team don't have, no kind of defense. Dak Prescott, you leaning on him to go out there and throw for 500 yards basically every week for you to have a chance to win a football game. And so at the end of the day, that's just not not going to serve you for the rest of the tenure of the season, man. So we'll definitely see what it do, man. Is most importantly, man, shout out to the Panthers, man. Big time home win for them. And so another game in week number 6 that definitely caught my eye really was the primetime game. Well, the primetime games, I'll say that in plural. One, you had Sunday Night Football. You had the Detroit Lions taking on the Kansas City Chiefs, traveling out there to Kansas City. The Lions, they had won 4 in a row coming into this football game. This was a perfect litmus test for them just to see what they really about out here in these streets. And, the Lions, they was able to, give a little offense in the first half, and they fell off a cliff in the second half, only scoring 1 TD. The Chiefs was able to win this game 30-17. Patrick Mahomes, man, the fastest guy to throw for 300 touchdowns in the National Football League. Congratulations to Patty Mahomes. 3 touchdowns on the game. And now the Chiefs, they 500 now. They at 500 now. We keep it real, man, on We On 5 Sports Podcast. The spot is that, I was kicking a little dirt on the Kansas City Chiefs earlier this season. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that, hey, now the road goes through Kansas City to win the Super Bowl. Not so fast, my friend. I think that for me, it was good for them to get to 500. Rashee Rice come back in week number 7. His long 6-game suspension is over with. This team looked like they churning the wheels a little bit, but it's a long NFL season. We 6 games in. It's 17 of these boys in the regular season. But I'm liking what I'm seeing. Travis Kelce looked like he was reinvigorated a little bit with Taylor Swift in attendance. I think that for Detroit, for me, they just weren't able really to run the football on Kansas City. And once I saw that, I'm like, okay, this is more so the advantage of the Kansas City Chiefs. Good job for them. Shout out to their defense too, man, being able to hold the Lions to 17. If I'm not mistaken, I think the Lions had scored in their 4 straight games, basically a 30-piece in every game. So to, be able to kind of stifle them down, man, keep them, reasonably with 17 points on the game, man, it's a good job by the Kansas City Chiefs. And then, man, both these Monday night games was off the chain, man. Monday night game was actually down here in the A-Town, man. We had the Buffalo Bills traveling to take on the Atlanta Falcons, as the Falcons was able to win this football game 24-14. You know, I was shocked just like everybody else was. And it's funny because it's something that I said, if I'm not mistaken, on episode 10 or 9, is that even though Buffalo, you know, at the time, you know, undefeated, I just don't like their offense. They don't have a number one receiver. And when you get into a ball game, especially with Josh Allen, if he get a couple turnovers in the game, man, it's a wrap. Meaning that, you know, their offense from a passing game standpoint, they don't have that alpha male number one receiver. And we've seen it over the past couple of weeks. They really kind of got burnt by it. Now, shout out to the Atlanta Falcons. I think that, to me, what the most impressive thing was for the Falcons was they came in this game and you saw in the first quarter, hey, this team going to turn over the football. We're going to score off them turnovers. And they had really Buffalo kind of playing downhill. You know, I think that, you know, for me, just Josh Allen was a little frustrated after the game. And, of course, so. Because as much praise as he's gotten, you know, MVP award winner, got a million commercials out there, you know, his wife, you know, lovely actress and all of that. This guy's never been to a Super Bowl. You know what I mean? So, you know, to me, you know, the Bills, you know, I think it was a little bit of humble pie for them. You know, for the Falcons, 3-2 on the year. You know, they 2-1 at home so far this season. It was a good win for them, kind of showing them, hey, we can hang with the big boys in the National Football League. So, I'm liking what I'm seeing, man, from the Falcons. So, big time win for them. There's a lot of people across Atlanta, you know, just hyped up and geeked up about that win against the Buffalo Bills. So, man, shout out to the Falcons in that one. And then we going to get into what I call a little payback in the second Monday night doubleheader. Save out what I consider my Bears for last. As the Chicago Bears was able to knock off the Washington Commanders 25-24. Very exciting football game, man. You know, it was that get back. You know, last season, you know, we all know about the Hail Mary play with the Washington Commanders last season up in Washington, man, to knock off my Bears, I believe, in week number 8 of the NFL season last year. You know, it was just crazy for me because I didn't get an opportunity to watch that game. I actually was traveling and was listening to that game, you know, on Sirius XM radio, and just like I couldn't believe, you know, couldn't believe what I was hearing. I couldn't wait to get home to be able to figure out what had happened. But this year, you know, to me, the Bears was big. You know, the Bears coming off of buying this football game. You know, Caleb Williams kind of go back to his home turf. He's from, you know, the Washington, D.C. area. And, you know, to me, the Bears, I think the bye week served them well because I think that the defense came out and played strong in the first half of the game. You know, I think in the second half they kind of slipped up just a little bit. But shout out to the offense of the Chicago Bears, man. This is a team now, you know, where that offense is steady clicking now. It's moving a little bit now. I love, you know, Swift was able to run the football, man, a bill on the ground. And I think for the Chicago Bears, it's a simple formula. Meaning that, you know, if we can get Swift anywhere between 80 to 100 yards on the ground, this football team has an opportunity, man, to get where they need to go. You know, I think Caleb Williams, you know, he played a solid football game. He wasn't too crazy, 250 yards and a touchdown, man. But most importantly, man, it really was just a collective effort from the offense and just not some of those what I call goofy penalties and so forth. So, big time win for my Chicago Bears, man. And that's my quick look at week number 6 in the National Football League. You know, coming up, you know, we got a situation, man, coming up on the Friday show. Obviously, we'll preview, you know, week number 7 across the National Football League. But, you know, we had to do that tour of duty, man. So, first and foremost, we got the rest of the show coming up. But first and foremost, man, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate your ear. We on Fire Sports Podcast. All right. Man, before we get out of here, man, don't forget to check me out, man, on where all podcasts can be listened to, preferably Podbean. Also on Facebook, we on Fire Sports Podcast. On YouTube, we on Fire Sports. On Twitter or X at We on Fire Sports. So we up out here, man. So I appreciate, man, all the love and the feedback, of course. And can't forget about the National Basketball Association. I know you're like, man, we ain't talking about no NBA. The season coming up, man. The season right on the doorstep. So now we'll kick game a little bit across the National Basketball Association. It's going to be an interesting season. One thing that, caught my attention, what you can consider breaking news across the NBA, man, the retirement of Malcolm Brogdon, man. Malcolm Brogdon, the Knicks brought Malcolm Brogdon in, definitely to see, what he's able to do and bring to, the New York Knicks, which, I'm a fan actually of Malcolm Brogdon, man. Left-handed guy, two-way guy, defensive guy, offense, won the Rookie of the Year. He's just one of my get it out the mud type of dudes, man. The first couple years of, of his career, had a couple injuries, then got to bouncing around the league a little bit. And I thought it was a nice little pickup, man, for the New York Knicks. And then all of a sudden, seeing, Shams come out with the whole situation with, hey, this guy retiring. I was just kind of shocked. I'm like, whoa, but NBA this season, man, is going to be interesting. When we actually have my official NBA season preview show, will be coming up next week at the top of the week. Going to break everything down, predictions, what I think, what's cracking across the National Basketball Association. But no, man, I think that, just as an overall view, you got the situation with the Eastern Conference. That thing is wide open. A lot of people down, here in the Atlanta area, man, excited about the Atlanta Hawks and just the moves that they've been able to make over the offseason. There was a lot of movement, across the East. Miles Turner going from Indiana to the Milwaukee Bucks. That was surprising. Damian Lillard, jumping ship, moving out, after getting waived by the Milwaukee Bucks out there to the Portland Trail Blazers. I wish him a speedy recovery. So there's a lot of movement, man, just across just the NBA, landscape. Looking at, some of the, news about the Golden State Warriors. We've been bringing in my man, Al Horford out there, man, to San Francisco, man, for the Warriors. Them re-signing Jonathan Kuminga. And so I think that whole Jonathan Kuminga situation, too, by the way, I think that they're going to come to a divorce. Because I think there's a lot of what I call shady feelings between really both parties. They've just kind of put themselves behind the 8 ball with the whole contract situation. But I just think that, Kuminga's he's going to be traded at some point. We'll see, though, man. But like I said, I'll get knee deep into my predictions. Who's going to win the West? Who I think is going to be the MVP this season. Also, another thing to look forward to, you got Durant down there, man, in H-Town in Houston with the Rockets. That's exciting. Sorry to hear about Fred VanVleet with the whole ACL situation for him, man. Looked like his season is going to be over with before it began. It was one of my, my Illinois gems, man, from representing Rockford, Illinois. So, yeah, it was kind of sad about that whole situation with him. But, there's a lot of movement across the NBA. And the NBA, they've been what I consider kind of the stepchild, to the National Football League over the past, now just about decade, man. And, it's just a lot of media coverage about just LeBron, Lakers, and all of this. It's officially Luka's team as LeBron James is going to be out basically for, looks like maybe about the first, couple weeks of the NBA season. Could be potentially a little bit longer. I think that, for me, people, have their opinions about LeBron either way. Me, I'm just going to keep it all the way 100. I do think LeBron is a diva. But I do think that the Los Angeles Lakers are better served going in the direction of Luka Doncic. I'm glad to see, he's dropped and shedded some pounds, got a chance to watch him play, over in the European, what they do over there in Europe, man, and just they whole little, those games. And it was great actually to see. Got my basketball fix over the summer, checking out Giannis, checking out Jokic. And can't forget, and how can we forget, about the reigning NBA champions, the Oklahoma City Thunder. This is a team, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, finals MVP, regular season MVP, scoring champ. It's a very small list of guys who have ever done that in the history of the National Basketball Association. So this is a team looking for that get back. They still got 1,000,001 draft picks on the board. So, they making moves and, just trying to kind of defend that title, man. So it's a lot of interesting things, man, that will jump off across the National Basketball Association season coming up. But nah, man, we got that real deal official, man, NBA preview show, man, coming up at the top of the week next week. But we definitely had to take our tour of duty across the National Basketball Association for a second. Can't forget about my man Jason Tatum, coming off the men as well. Hopefully the Boston Celtics will kind of take it slow with him. They brought in Anthony Simons from the Portland Trail Blazers. I think that he's in a situation where he might be able to get off a little bit this season. He averaged basically a dub out there in Portland before, getting up out of there. So there's a lot of things, and can't forget, I know my people in the shop like, man, you ain't gonna talk about the Bulls, Joe. Yeah, I'm gonna get into the Bulls a little bit, Joe. I've always expressed, my feelings about my Bulls, my hometown team, literally my neighborhood team. Grew up in the same neighborhood and community as the Chicago Bulls, lovely United Center and so forth on the west side. Shout out to everybody over there. But I'm not happy with the front office of this organization, and I think that Tourist Konosovas, I just think that this guy's just unfit to, have that position. Now, the Bulls, they did re-up Josh Giddey, 4 years, basically $100 million, 25 a pop. I do think that they, in certain respects, got that right by not overpaying, Josh Giddey. He had a good season for my Bulls last year, and I've been checking him out, in the preseason. Shout out that win the other day against, the Cleveland Cavaliers. So, I've been kind of watching and peeping, man, but I don't know about this ball club, man. I do think that Chicago deserves a more aggressive front office approach. But I ain't going to take that out on my youngest on the team, man, So we'll see what it do, especially, the Kobe Whites of the world and, Matas Bucelises of the world and, Ayo Dosunmus of the world. I like my youngest on the Bulls, but I just think this team is still stuck in the mud, man. So we'll definitely see what it do when I come up with the preview show, man. But we'll be right back at you guys, man, on Friday. First and foremost, man, I appreciate you guys checking me out, checking in once again, as always. But we'll be right back on Friday, man. We're going to preview week number 7 across the National Football League. Also, too, man, we're going to circle back into a little bit of college football as well. Just seeing what's going on across that landscape, man. But until the end, man, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate you. Yeah. We on Fire Sports Podcast. That's right.